Imagine sitting across from me, maybe with a cup of coffee in your hand, the room quiet except for our voices. I want to tell you about Sodom and Gomorrah, two names you've probably heard since childhood, yet rarely pause to consider. These weren't just ancient cities reduced to ash. They were mirrors of the human soul, our pride, our beauty, and our blindness. Scripture tells us that Sodom and Gomorrah were once radiant with prosperity. Their markets overflowed, their towers gleamed in the sun, and their people believed they had built heaven on earth. But like every civilization that mistakes comfort for purpose, they lost sight of the sacred boundary between freedom and corruption. Modern psychology tells us that wealth can dull empathy. A study from the University of California found that people who feel socially superior tend to show less compassion toward others. It's astonishing how science sometimes echoes the Bible. When empathy dies, societies crumble long before their walls do. I once spoke with an older man from Texas who said, "I used to think God punished Sodom for being wicked. Now I think he just let them burn themselves down." Maybe that's the truth. God doesn't always send fire from the sky. Sometimes he simply allows us to feel the heat of our own choices. Look around today. We see new Sodoms, cities that never sleep, glowing with ambition and distraction. Freedom is mistaken for indulgence. Justice bends under the weight of wealth. Faith becomes a performance. We praise individuality, yet grow lonelier. We talk about kindness, but avoid the cost of caring. The story of Sodom isn't about fear, it's about reflection. Amid the fire, there was still a man named Abraham, pleading for mercy. "If there are 10 righteous," he said, "spare the city." That prayer still echoes. It reminds us that one compassionate heart can delay judgment, that goodness, even in small doses, still matters. Many elders I've spoken with say they feel the world is losing its moral compass. Maybe they're right, but maybe they're also part of the answer. You, who've lived through decades of change, who've seen the rise and fall of values, might just be the 10 righteous holding this generation together. Scripture's message is not about wrath, it's about awakening. The fire from heaven wasn't only to destroy, but to illuminate. Each time we trade conscience for convenience, we edge closer to that fire. But as long as we can still feel compassion, still bow our heads in prayer, and still believe in forgiveness, there is hope that Sodom's lesson has not been wasted. When we talk about Lot, many see him as a man lucky enough to survive divine punishment. But Lot is more than a survivor. He represents the person who tries to escape darkness, yet still clings to its comfort. He lived in the city's luxury, heard the laughter of those mocking justice, and saw the weak trampled. When angels told him to leave, he hesitated. Isn't that what we all do? When life calls us to change, we hesitate, afraid to let go of what's familiar, even when it's quietly destroying us. Then came his wife, who looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. A single glance sealed her fate. Why such harshness? Because that glance was more than curiosity. It was attachment. Sometimes the hardest chains to break are not around our wrists, but around our hearts. I once spoke with an elderly widow who still set 2 cups of coffee each morning, one for herself, one for the husband she'd lost years ago. "I can't let go," she whispered. I realized then, we all have something we can't stop looking back at. But God doesn't forbid the past to punish us. He does it to save us from burning ourselves twice. Modern psychology confirms what Scripture already knew. People who live in constant regret or nostalgia are more prone to sadness and despair. A Harvard study found that those who stay trapped in negative memories are twice as likely to lose their sense of joy. Perhaps that's why God said, "Do not look back." He was not being cruel. He was teaching us how to survive. Lot fled to safety, yet even there, peace eluded him. In a cave surrounded by silence, he learned that escaping the flames was not enough. For Sodom still lived inside his heart and in the hearts of his daughters. That's the real tragedy. We can leave Sodom, but if we don't change within, Sodom leaves with us. His daughters, fearful and lost, committed sins of their own, birthing the Moabites and Ammonites. Their story is uncomfortable, but deeply human. It shows how trauma, guilt, and fear can echo through generations if never healed. I often think of this when counseling people who say, "I just want to start over." And I tell them, starting over means more than changing places. It means changing spirit. Otherwise, we rebuild the same ruins in a different land, carrying the same fire that once burned us. Evangelist Billy Graham once said, "The fire from heaven never falls until the fire within has gone out." It means destruction doesn't begin with God. It begins when the flame of goodness inside us dies. So, Lot's story isn't about punishment, it's about awakening. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storm. He walks with us through it, shaping us in the process. For those of us in later years, this message feels personal. We've seen cities rise and fall, dreams bloom and fade, yet in every ending there's a hidden grace, a quiet reminder that from ashes, faith can still grow. That is the beauty of redemption. Even after the fire, life can return. God doesn't ask us to forget Sodom. He asks us to remember it differently, as a teacher, not a curse. Each of us carries a small part of that story, a moment when we almost looked back but chose to move forward. And in those moments, heaven smiles. Because salvation isn't a grand event, it's a daily choice. To forgive when it's easier to resent, to love when it's safer not to hope when everything seems lost. That's how we keep the fire from falling again. Not by fear of punishment, but by the quiet power of transformation. When the last flame died, the land that once was Sodom and Gomorrah turned to ash. But even the ashes have a voice. They whisper to anyone willing to listen. Destruction is never the end. It is a warning, and sometimes a beginning. Abraham stood far away, watching smoke rise into the sky. He didn't rejoice. He wept, because he understood something timeless. God's justice always walks hand in hand with mercy, and even when the world seems beyond saving, heaven always leaves one path open for return. Most of us, by the time we reach our 50s or 60s, have lived through our own version of Sodom. Maybe it was a broken marriage, a lost dream, or years spent chasing something that left us empty. But the beauty of faith is that we're still here, still breathing, still searching. Science calls it neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rebuild itself even in old age. I believe the soul works the same way. No matter how far we've gone, it can still heal, still change, still find its way back to the light. So if you feel it's too late to start again, remember Abraham's prayer. Even as fire fell, he kept pleading for mercy, and God listened. It's never too late to come home, never too late to forgive, to begin again. Sometimes God doesn't take things away to punish us, He takes them to set us free. Fire can destroy, but it can also purify. Just like gold refined in heat, our hearts become clearer when we walk through trials. Pain, in God's hands, becomes a sculptor, not a sentence. Years ago, I visited the Dead Sea, the place many believe was once that valley of Sodom. The water was so salty nothing could live there, yet the sunlight shimmered across its surface with breathtaking beauty. A local guide leaned toward me and said, "Even where life ended, light remained." I stood in silence, because that's the truth of divine mercy. Light never abandons the places where darkness once ruled. Our world today might seem more like Sodom than ever, crowded, noisy, lost. But as long as compassion exists, Hope still lives among us. Scripture says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Maybe that's our calling now, to keep mercy alive in a weary world, to be the 10 righteous people who still pray, still care, still love. Whatever you've lost, whatever you regret, know this. If you're hearing these words, God is still speaking to you. Not through thunder, but through a quiet whisper. Don't look back. Keep walking. I am with you, and as you walk forward, carry that light within you, so Sodom will never rise again, not in this world, and not within your heart.